Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today. Authors and writers, and we're very special today to have one of those great writers who's in the East Coast while I'm in the West Coast, so we're trying to coordinate time and weathers and everything else. Daniel Jose Older, he is coming in from Brooklyn, New York, and he's originally from Boston. I like people from Boston and New York. Different atmospheres, very cosmopolitan. It's really great. I really enjoyed it. Daniel, thank you for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So do you still say water or you say water?
You know, I never fully got the Boston accent, even though I grew up in the middle of it. But I don't even say pack or cat. I don't know how. I got away from it, but you know, somehow I just never picked it up.
You know, I was looking at your background, getting ready to do some research for the show. You're a writer,
Yeah,
music composer, and for a while you were a paramedic. I mean, that just really gives you a background on that whole idea. So I can imagine the stories you must have working over in New York. You know, I'm
yes.
surprised you haven't write a script for that one as well. The idea.
Maybe one day, we'll see.
Hey, so what is this idea about, you writing and the idea of doing workshops on anti-oppression
Sure.
and, your soul band, Gold Star, how do you put all this together?
That's a good question. I'm still trying to figure all that out myself because it is a lot of disparate pieces, right? But I mean, I feel like it did start to come together entirely when I decided to really dedicate myself to novels, where I could really bring in. A novel is a great place to bring in a lot of those different elements. So, you know, whether it's talking about ghosts and spirituality or the city from different perspectives, or these ideas of crisis and different kinds of violence that take place, that is really where it started to really just formulate as like a unified whole. So I could really think through a lot of because I also was working as a community organizer for a long time.
Right.
So for a couple of years. So that was another piece of the puzzle that came together. And it was then, you know, through reading. I've always loved reading. I've always been a nerd. Loved fantasy and science fiction. So to really like try to bring those together into some kind of whole, you know, in the course of 300 or 400 pages, that sort of became the challenge. But it was something that I didn't feel like I could do with short stories or with songs or, you know, anything else. It was like I really needed to just bring in all the different parts into a novel and see what happened.
What made you?
That's what happened.
What made you pick up the pen and pick up the computer and says, I just don't want it in my head. I want to sit down and put it on paper. I mean, when does that happen?
That's a great question. And I ask myself that all the time. I'd always wanted to write and always written, but I wasn't sure what medium was right for a long time. So that's how I ended up doing music, was trying to just see if that was where I needed to be. And that's always a part of me, but I didn't really know where to put all the stories for a long time. And I think it was a combination. There was one year, 2008, I want to say, where I read Junot Diaz, The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and I read Octavia Butler, and I read all the Harry Potter books over the course of as they were coming out. And something about that combination, and Walter Mosley, who's one of my favorite writers too, that combination of stories really clicked and voices really clicked in my head. And I said, I can do this. This is something that I could take part in and be a part of. And, having worked on the ambulance at that point for 7 years or something, 7 or 8 years, I felt ready. I felt like this was something I could really participate in as a literary art form. And so I sat down to write what became Shadow Shaper, which is the book that came out in June. And so I would say that it really felt like it felt right. Of all the different things that I had tried, all the different artistic avenues, it was a place where I could really channel my thoughts and my dreams and the world building and fantasies that I'd done. And it was just like, yes, I felt at home.
So your gut told you this is the right path.
Yeah.
An intellectual thing. It was just like, it just felt good as you kept doing it. It just was good.
I'll be honest with you though. Also, there was definitely some practicality to it because I'm a practical person too. And I knew I wanted to have an artistic life and I didn't want to be on the ambulance forever. And I also knew that music was not paying the rent. Because I'd been working as a composer for a couple of years at that point, and nothing was really popping as far as like making any actual money that you could live off with composing. Some people can do it, God bless them, but I knew that wasn't going to be my path professionally, maybe artistically. And I'm glad I did it because I think the music feeds a lot into how I write prose. and my own just experience of the world. But you know, novels, no one will ever say like, you know, I started writing novels to make money, but compared to writing music, it's a lot more profitable. And that was a part of my decision making. Honestly, I said, let me try this. You know, like young adult fiction is supposedly big right now, and it is. So let me see how I can add my voice into that mix.
Now, being in New York City, you know, Brooklyn, New York,
Mm-hmm.
and the diversity, oh my gosh, you know, and the shifts and
Yeah.
the politics, and just the environment, how does that have an impact on your writing?
And that's a great way to put it, what you just said, because that's exactly what it is. It's such an alive city. And, you know, you can't walk 2 blocks without seeing like 8 or 9 different cultures, you know, right there and all their vitality, you know, everything. And it's not a performance, you know, it's not a performative kind of diversity. It's just life and daily life. And I think that is such a huge blessing. And I think it's very missed. You know, it's like a missed opportunity for all the books and movies that we have about New York City. And we rarely get to see the full power of how many different cultures are here. And I'll read books and I'll be like, what New York is this? You know, or watch shows about New York and it's like, what New York has only white people everywhere all the time? That's insanity. Like, that's just not any of New York. Even if you live on the Upper West Side, there's a million cultures there participating in life, you know, even if they don't necessarily live right there because they can't afford it. So, and then there's these power imbalances and there are different cultures clashing up against each other, and that's history. And there's the future, you know, all these things are happening. And it's like, man, what a perfect place to set a ghost story, right? Like ghosts are about the future and the past coming together and the present tense. And they're like living embodiments of history walking with you. So, you know, New York is a perfect place for that. There's so much history here. There's so much happening in the streets in terms of who lives and who dies and whose life matters. You know, ghosts.
Ghost. When you have the idea of writing, do you have sort of a common theme that sort of you carry into different scenarios, or is it every novel is completely different, or do you see some commonalities in what you're trying to say?
I would say the framework that I just laid out about the city and all of its possibility in terms of both culture and crisis, that would be the framework that I go into every novel thinking through. So I sort of write in one large world, which would be kind of like a supernatural Brooklyn. And then there are different communities within that world that interact with each other and are kind of adjacent and parallel to each other. So to me, like world building, as a fantasy writer, especially world building is king, even if the world is already built being Brooklyn, but then what is the community that we're building within that world, right? So it's one thing to think about, this is, you know, these are the structures around us and these are the powers that be and all these different layers that are happening. But then it's also like, who are the people and how do they interact and what's their relationship to each other? And I think as novelists, we're not encouraged to think in terms of community very often. But community is so important, especially communities of color. That's how we survive, right? And that's how we make it through institutional racism and different forms of oppression, all these things. Community is really what, you know, has our back in ways that, you know, don't get a lot of play in mainstream white literature. So I think that's a really important level, you know, just the small ways that people know each other or heard about each other, or the interlacing of relationships. You know, this guy knew that guy who knew my aunt whose cousin, you know, runs this place, so I'm gonna go over there, that bodega. You know, like all these different things that are kind of small nuances of life, but also come together to form this very vast sort of network of social relationships that are very profound. So I think that's something that kind of runs throughout my work in the sense of just friendships and people knowing each other, even if some of them are dead, you know, like, there'll be ghosts that are in relationship to living people, and how does that all play out? Or music, or art, you know, the way that people know each other through music and all these different levels. That's definitely like an underlying theme that I go into it with.
So the idea that you're sort of geographically, because of being in New York, you're influenced by every person that's around you, whether you're standing there catching the train or you're hearing somebody say something on the corner. So you're constantly sort of taking that all in and mixing it all together and putting it into your book.
Yeah.
It must make it hugely diverse and hugely confusing.
I mean, not so confusing because it's sort of just, I think of it like, when we talk about diversity, like to me, it's really just about honesty, right? It's about just what do you really see when you're walking around in the streets? And do you grant the people that you see their full humanity? or are they just part of the background? And I think that's where the diversity conversation gets really important, because really we're talking about humanity and we're talking about being honest about what we see and what we live through. But what we get a lot, especially when diversity becomes a hot topic, we'll get a lot of kind of blackface, basically, like people just painting brown or black characters over white ones without giving a lot of thought to the depth of what it actually means to be a person of color in America. Or, different genders. Like all these different levels of that are also about power and privilege and very uncomfortable conversations that we have to have with ourselves and with each other if we're being honest about what it really means to talk about living in a multicultural society. So it's sort of confusing, but I also think of it as just like, if we're just being real, like if I grant the people that I pass by on the street the power of full humanity, then they come to life on the page. And that, to me, like the real crux of it is that makes stories better, right? That makes literature a better art form, because there's more depth to it and the characters around us are more real and they have conflicts and crises and everything. And there's the interaction of those and with the world around us. And that is a depth and a level of layering that gives us better books.
And you're a relatively young writer. I can only imagine what happens when you add on more and more levels of experiences in your own life, and then you pour that into it. It just gets more and more mixed together. And like you said, Las Culturas that are in New York, my God, there's no end to it. So you're never gonna, I don't see you ever having writer blocks.
I never do. I think a lot of times what we think of as writer's block is really like, I don't know, for me anyway, let me speak just for myself. Like I will come to the edge of what I know story, and then I'll have to take a walk to figure out what the next thing is. But that's not so much block as much as like you're just writing, you're keeping up to speed with yourself. But I will say that I had to really kind of remind myself or create a mantra for myself in order to get started writing before I was really a writer. I would blog, right? And I would talk about what happened on the ambulance. And it was very easy for me. I would just sit down and write whatever crazy mess happened the night before, and boom, there would be a story. It would be a really good short story because we would deal with some messed up shit. And then it was so easy for me to do that. And I realized like there must have been something blocking me from writing books, because I knew I wanted to write fiction, but I hadn't really. And then I was like, if I just make this up, that would be fiction. So and it made me stop and say, like I've been overthinking things, and I think writers can do that. We want to write this great deep story that says all this stuff about humanity, and sometimes that actually stops us from writing because we're so caught up in trying to write well or tell this bigger story. And it's like, if you just commit to telling the story, you will then write the story, and then you can let the depth form from that. As opposed to being like, I gotta make the perfect sentence, I gotta make it all right, all this stuff, which is really like perfection is very, very dangerous, I think, to the artist, and like really it's like just, so my mantra became just tell the effing story, like just sit down and write the story, tell what happened, and then take it from.
Sounds to me that some of it comes out of your mind and some of it comes out of the heart. At that moment you feel that way, and you sort of follow the trend wherever it goes. So you're all sort of, you're a mystery to yourself at times when you're doing these works.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the fun of it, I think, because I'll write to find out what happens next, because I don't know. So that's the excitement of writing a novel, is like, where are these characters going to go? I got to find out. So I need to write it and see. And then, keep me on my toes.
You always think of writers as being constantly frustrated because not sure what to go with it. You seem exactly the opposite, where I'm looking forward to finding out where it's going to go. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Daniel Jose Older, and you got to find his books, absolutely. You said your newest book was what?
Well, the book that came out in June is called Shadow Shaper. One word, Shadow Shaper. It's a young adult book about a girl named Sierra Santiago in Brooklyn who paints murals. That's kind of her hobby, and she loves painting and drawing. And she finds out that her family has been involved with a long legacy of a kind of magic called shadow shaping, where they're able to bring works of art to life by channeling spirits into them. So she basically learns how to bring her murals to life with spirits. And then it's about it turns out that this anthropologist was involved with them and kind of got a little bit power hungry. So it's very complicated, but it's basically, when I sat down to write it, I was thinking like, we need our own Harry Potter. Like we need to have magical stories that take place in the cities and have the rhythms and the truths, you know, and the narrative structures of our lives, but also, you know, are fantastical and exciting and all these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to take a moment to thank Marcela Landris, who put us together. Network is great people,
yes,
putting together great people. So I just want to thank her and acknowledge her also for her support. Where can our viewers find out more about your ongoing work, past works, etc., social media? You have a Facebook page, etc.
Yes, I'm most active on Twitter. At Twitter, I'm at DJOLDER, DJ Older. That's where I update the most. I am on Facebook. I have an author page on Facebook where I stay up to date on the basic stuff that I'm doing. Ghoststar.net, GHOSTSTAR.net is my website. I blog on there. You can find stories from when I was a paramedic, that my whole ambulance life is on there. And then Shadowshaper itself has its own website. That's shadowshaper.net. Shadowshaper.net. On there, I've been doing a really cool project with a group of high school students in Brooklyn who've been writing fantasy and science fiction stories about Brooklyn. After reading Shadowshaper and going through an intensive advanced writing course with me, I've been publishing their work on my website, and it's fantastic work. Check it out. There's an interactive map of Brooklyn that has their stories on it that you can look at. And they're really deep stories. They're really, really powerful work. I was blown away by them. So if you're interested in hearing what young people in Brooklyn are writing about, you know, definitely go over there and see, you know, what they've been saying, because it's really good work. But that's pretty much where I am.
Okay, as we're coming to a close here in today's show, and again, I want to thank you for being our guest on our show, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking to Daniel Jose Older. What's the best advice you think you ever received? And, you know, I'm sure you got a lot of it, that you'd like to pass on to our viewers here as we're getting ready to close the show?
Oh, that's a great question.
Putting you on the spot here.
I know, right? Gee. Well, I would say it's kind of twofold, but definitely when you finish something and you send it out and it's done, you know, but take your break, do your relaxation and celebrate and everything, and then start something new. Not to say in the sense of being a taskmaster on yourself and like forcing yourself to, you know, push too hard, but it's really good to not just be obsessing about that one thing and having sent it out. And for me anyway, it's very helpful to have other projects to work on. So right now I'm writing 2 books right now at the same time, and I'm working on essays and I have other stuff. And then, so then you're not like, I wonder, you know, what's going to happen with this? Because listen, publishing is slow and frustrating, and there's plenty of rejection to go around, you know, even for well-established writers and different levels, you're always getting rejected. It's just part of it. So if you're not working on new stuff, that rejection feels a lot heavier, because you're just like, well, this is the only thing I got out there. You know, this is, no one likes it, whatever. No, like really, if you're a writer, like write. But having said that, I do want to add, I really disagree with the advice to write every day. I think that can be very destructive, actually. If that's your rhythm and you can do that, that's great. But I will tell you that at this point in my career and throughout my career, I've never written every single day, and I've never tried to make myself write every single day, because for most of that time I was working full time on the ambulance, and even now I'm, you know, I teach and I have a life that I live, and as writers we have to have lives. We have to be alive and be out in the world. We cannot, you know, just disappear into our little rooms forever. And, you know, it's very damaging, I think, to bring guilt or shame into the writing process. And if you have this notion that you didn't write yesterday, so you're off your schedule, you're going to sit down today and feel that instead of feeling present. And to write, we have to be present. We have to be alive. You know, we have to be all these things, fall in love, get our hearts broken, work for a living, you know, all these things, like that's part of being alive. So, you know, don't write every day. Like, write a lot, yes, like be intense and you know, do your work. Yes, do the work, absolutely. But don't be on yourself and set yourself up for somebody else's schedule and then feel bad that you didn't get it done.
Fantastic.
There you go.
Well, say thank you very much for being on the show. Please feel free.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. And then I wish you continuous success on your books, and that you're never going to fall behind in lacking for material. That's for sure. I picked that up. But, you know, you speak from the heart. It comes across even in the interview, and I really applaud that it's a genuine work of
before we go, let me plug my, I have a book coming up in January coming out. It's called Midnight Taxi Tango. and this is on the adult side. It's part of the Bone Street Roomba Urban Fantasy series, and it comes out in January from Rock Books. It's available for pre-order now, and I'm excited about it. It's a very creepy and messed up book. I think I can't wait to, because I know people are going to be like, what is wrong with you? But in a good way.
That's the best kind of book. So once you walk away with this, what's wrong with all of us, you know?
Man, I was wondering that about myself when I was writing it.
Hey, dude, if we don't wonder that, we probably don't change. So that's
Right.
a good idea. Well, Seth, thank you very much for being on the show, and I look forward to having you in future shows and highlighting more of your fantastic work.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Take care.
All right, Daniel Jose. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for being here with us. Very, very exciting interview. I really learned a lot. And it was meant out of the passion, out of the heart, out of the idea that, you know, you get the atmosphere of wanting to do something, not because you have to, because you want to. So thank you, Daniel Jose Older, Marcela Landres, for connecting us with these wonderful individuals, and we'll do more shows. With that, we say adios. Adios, Daniel. Take care.
Adios.
Take care.